Izwe lethu, Shango lashu. I first want to thank the head for research and graduate studies and College of Human Sciences, Mafrika Puleng Sekgalo, and also thank Andrew Phillips, the Executive Dean. I want to express my deep appreciation to the Black House Collective, which has tirelessly kept the Sobukwe name alive, not only Bao Sobukwe, but Me Sobukwe as well, in really helping us to bring the memory back into our discourse. And tonight, under this institution, I think it's a marvelous occasion, and I'm honored and privileged to be here. I've been thinking a long time about this conversation tonight and wondered what offering I would bring to the table that could contribute to the discourse of Professor Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe's silencing. I have been thinking about the classified files on Sobukwe, which after 40 years have yet to be opened up by the present government. And we must begin to demand the opening up of that classified information so that we can see his thought. And perhaps amongst those documents, we might find his voice. But I think it's something that we must demand 40 years after his death. I want to start the conversation by saying that I am Sobukwe. I am Sobukwe clause. Hashtag. I see this as a very important starting point because I see the clause as a beautiful gift that we have spent the last 40 years grieving, agonizing about the clause that incarcerated Sobukwe, exiled him out of his constituency, and ensured that his voice was never heard again. Yes, I agree. However, this is but one way of looking at it. This Sobukwe clause in a box that I hope we can explore tonight and discover a deeper meaning and claim it as our rallying point to discover the many lived experiences that are faced by many of you in this room. The hashtag fees must fall. The hashtag silence must fall. The hashtag data must fall. I want to submit that the Sobukwe clause needs to be unpacked. It is time that we opened this package to look inside and examine what was being silenced. In opening this package, we may find a blueprint that provides a roadmap of the way forward. In understanding what is inside the Sobukwe clause, we may discover who we are and how to take the struggle forward. How can we think outside the box of suffering into a box of courage, into a box of victory? I believe what is inside the Sobukwe clause connects us to ourselves, to our world. It articulates those things we can't. Story is our story. We have to affirm the hashtag I am the Sobukwe clause to end the photoshopping that has dissolved in the predominant false narratives of the colonizers, of the oppressors, and the messages come from hidden agendas and override, hide, and even persecute political thought and discourse they may wish to snuff out. I wept that day when I decided to take a closer look inside the Sobukwe clause to discover what was being silenced. Finally, I was witnessing a story that validated my own. How did Sobukwe feel the day the Sobukwe clause became a reality? It must have been impossible to express how it feels to move in a world that denies your existence, except to cultivate a culture of fear against you, your family, and the people you convinced that Azania is possible. I want to inside the Sobukwe clause. I'm not going into the laws, etc., because following speakers will speak to that issue. The Sobukwe clause contains the voice of Sobukwe. It is the unraveling of this box that will give voice to the ideas, The Sobukwe clause for me is a symbol and a guide to breaking our silence. It is an important signifier and validation of our discourse of dissent. It is a path that allows us to trespass on the arrogant thoughts of those who would dare to treat us like strangers, aliens, and illegal people in our own land. Inside the Sobukwe clause is the need to break the silence, to remind ourselves of who we are in the world as African people. The Sobukwe clause provides strength and determination to desist buying into the false narratives of the enemy, which tells us we are nothing. The Sobukwe clause contains all the ingredients to shut this narrative down. What Sobukwe articulates, and I quote, "We are reminding our people that acceptance of any indignity, any insult, any humiliation is acceptance of inferiority. They must first think of themselves as men and women before they can demand to be treated as such. We must free the mind of the African. Our country is begging for a mental revolution." He needed to be silenced in order to stop that mental revolution. He went on to say, "We are not begging the foreign minorities to treat our people courteously. We are calling on our people to assert their personality. We are not hoping for a change of heart on the part of the Christian oppressor." That voice had to be silenced because it was a voice that was not going to beg for freedom. It was not a voice that is going to plead and negotiate for freedom. There is no doubt in my mind that the Sobukwe clause wanted to shut down any voice that celebrates and positions Africans as people of power. Sobukwe said, "Our immediate battle is for status, which builds up the confidence of the masses and imbues them with a sense of the inevitability of victory. We propose for 1958 a campaign against the appellations by which the Herrenvolk, master race, are pleased to know us. Next year, we are going to put a stop to the terms boys and girls. There is no apartheid regime that would have wanted a voice that could convince people that actually they were the master race and that they could rise up against the so-called master race and become people of dignity, people who can rule, people who can govern, and people who can take us forward." In this era, where white supremacy still reigns in the economy, in commerce, in industry, we need to lift the lid and assert ourselves. The Sobukwe Clause is a reminder that we deserve to be sovereign. It is a reminder that we cannot be indifferent observers, spectators, bystanders, even experts of liberation. The clause forces us to become actors and agents of change. It compels us not only to be witnesses, but to make history like Sobukwe did at Sharpeville. There were no spectators there. There were witnesses. There were actors. And this is what the Sobukwe Clause was trying to silence and stop. The Sobukwe Clause intended to silence African sovereignty, national identity, and African ownership of the land. These are fundamental to our existence. In this, Sobukwe said, we are but tools of history, which will always find new tools. We are not afraid of the consequences of our action. And it is not our intention to ask for mercy. We aim politically at a government of the Africans, by the Africans, for the Africans, with everybody who owns his own loyalty to Africa and who is prepared to accept the democratic rule of an African government being regarded as African. Socially, we aim at the full development of the African personality and a ruthless uprooting and outlawing of the forms of manifestation of the racial myth. There is no apartheid regime that would not silence a voice like that. There is no apartheid regime that would stand for somebody who would say that the African people can rule themselves for the Africans. This was a big threat, and it remains a threat to this day. Sobukwe's ideas of the nationhood is an African one, where the first step towards its full realization is a systematic process of an individual and collective liberation from political, cultural, spiritual, psychological, and economic dependency. Sobukwe did not separate the human personality from the political goals of an Africanist social philosophy and saw them as connected. This clause needed to be silenced. This bold, unapologetic voice that was a key influencer that would probably be trending on Instagram and Twitter today needed to be silenced. He said, I wish to make it clear again that we are anti-nobody. We are pro-Africa. We breathe, we dream, we live Africa because Africa and humanity are inseparable. There is no apartheid regime that would not tolerate this. The Sobukwe Clause is an invitation to us to build a new political imaginary. It cannot be that 75% of youth in this country reach the age of 30 without having worked a single day in their lives. It cannot be that we have a Gini coefficient which records us as the most unequal society in the world. We need a new political imaginary that understands how Sobukwe's positioning of the struggle was not apartheid, but the dispossession of land by an invading conqueror that changed the African into a class of the conquered and dispossessed people. On this basis, it cannot be that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, as it is often claimed. It belongs to the African people since time immemorial, with wars of national resistance fought against dispossession and conquest. And the clause reminds us to put those who have forgotten that this is our land on notice. We will not be silenced. The Sobukwe Clause gives us a vision and a political imaginary that unites and rallies the African people into one national front on the basis of African nationalism and overthrow white racist settler colonial domination in order to establish and maintain the right of self-determination of African people for a unitary, non-racial democracy. There is no apartheid regime that would put up with a voice that speaks of self-determination of the African people. You need to silence that voice. The Sobukwe Clause requires our imaginaries to be different. The new imaginary cannot have its moorings in the dominant discourse of gear, of NDPs, of structural adjustment. It must seek to locate itself in a discourse of dissent that comes from a deep critique of the different forms of domination and violence in our times. Any new imaginary cannot be tied to the dominant discourse and systems of violence and exclusion. The Sobukwe Clause is a political imaginary that moves us away from the Eurocentric and androcentric methodologies, which only observe and describe methodologies which quantify, which percentify, which classify, completely indifferent to phenomena which cannot be obtained or explained through its frames. The Sobukwe Clause shows the need to deconstruct the dominant mythology, disallowing the invasion of the dominant discourse, refusing the integration of African people into the agenda of exploitation, of continued dispossession, and poverties, plural. An African professor wrote in one of the newspapers that the Sobukwe Clause was created out of discomfort. It is a discomfort to this day, because Sobukwe reminds us of land dispossession. His memory is uncomfortable for a society that is determined and intent on forgetting the past. The past will not go away. Some have deluded themselves to believe that because we no longer see or talk to Sobukwe, then all is well. This obliviousness is dangerous to the future of this country. Sobukwe is a necessary reminder of the need for social justice. We need to remember him. We need not only just to idealize him, but we need to take action around his ideas and thoughts. Finally, the Sobukwe Clause is a reminder that you cannot grow beyond your thoughts if your thoughts are those of a slave. You remain a slave. That voice needed to be silenced. The Sobukwe Clause forces us to lift the veil of silence and find ourselves in the hashtag I am the Sobukwe Clause. It urges us to search more quantitative ways in oral history, in our lived analysis, using fluid categories, listening for the nuances, searching for the shadow in poetry, in myth, and in metaphor. The Sobukwe Clause invites us to a way of knowing that refuses to control and be exploited, to find our connectedness to each other, to place together these fragments, to discern the essence, to move into another space, another time, capturing hidden knowledges. We need that knowledge. Regenerating forgotten spaces. We have to open the Sobukwe Clause to discover those forgotten spaces. Refinding our words for action. reweaving and imagining new possibilities for the future. That was the voice that needed to be silenced, because it was a voice that helped us to imagine ourselves as different, imagine ourselves as liberating ourselves, not liberated by somebody else through negotiations, etc., etc. It is the Sobukwe clause that we break the silence with peoples living on the margins and on the peripheries, that we must seek the beginnings of an alternative discourse of freedom, away from the rainbow freedom narrative. It is not difficult to see that we are at the end of an era when every old category begins to have a hollow sound, and when we are groping in the dark to discover the new. Can we find new words? Can we search new ways? Can we create out of the material of the human spirit possibilities to transform the existing exploitative social order to discern a greater human potential? The Sobukwe clause shows us that we need in the world today are new universalisms. Not universalisms that deny the many and affirm the one. Not universalisms born of Eurocentrics or patriarchalists, but universalisms that recognize the universal in the specific civilization idioms in the world. Universalisms that will not deny the accumulated experiences and knowledges of past generations, but that which will not accept the imposition of a monolithic structures under which it is presumed all other peoples must be subsumed. A discourse that will respect the plurality of the different societies, of their philosophy, of their ideology, their traditions and cultures. One that will be rooted in the particular, in the vernacular. One which will find a resonance in the different civilizations birthing Azania. We need to imagine alternative perspectives to change, to craft visions that evolve out of conversations like this, across cultures, across traditions, across conversations between cultures that challenge and transcend the totalitarianism of the Western locus. Conversations that are not mediated by the hegemony of the universal discourse. This will mean finding the voice of Sobukwe inside the Sobukwe clause. This will mean that we need another ethic of dialogue. We need to find new perspectives, new notions of development, new notions of democracy, new notions even of dissent, other concepts of power, not power to control, not power to hegemonize, but power to facilitate, to enhance, and governance. Other notions of equality, not the equality that makes us flat and faceless citizens of the nation. Perhaps the notion of dignity, which comes from the depth, from roots, could change the discourse. Because, #, I am the Sobukwe clause.